Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a story that has reshaped Europe, challenged old assumptions, and forced the world to rethink power, resilience, and strategy. We're exploring how Ukraine turned the tables on Vladimir Putin, how Russia is paying a price far greater than expected, and why this conflict has become one of the defining struggles of the 21st century. This isn't just a story of war, but a story of miscalculations, unity, innovation, and the unexpected strength of a nation many underestimated. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in early 2022, the world braced for what many thought would be a quick collapse of Ukraine. Even some experts predicted Kiev would fall within days, but instead of breaking, Ukraine stood its ground. The determination shown by Ukrainian soldiers, volunteers, and civilians was a shock to Moscow and a rallying point for the rest of the world. The early days of the conflict exposed a truth Russia didn't expect. Ukraine would not surrender its identity, its freedom, or its sovereignty without a fight. And that fight changed everything. At first, Russia relied heavily on overwhelming force, believing its sheer military size would create a quick victory. But it underestimated the strategic skill of Ukraine's defenders. Ukrainian forces used mobility, intelligence, and deep knowledge of their own terrain to outmaneuver a much larger army. They targeted supply lines, ambushed convoys, and disrupted command structures. What was meant to be a lightning strike turned into one of the most embarrassing military failures in modern history for Moscow, with stalled columns and unexpected losses. Ukraine's early victories weren't just tactical, they were psychological. They shattered Russia's narrative of inevitability and inspired democratic nations to unite in support. As images and stories emerged of Ukrainians building barricades, making Molotov cocktails, and standing defiantly in front of armored vehicles, global public opinion shifted dramatically. Support poured in from Europe, the United States, and across the world. Military aid, intelligence sharing, and economic assistance created a lifeline that strengthened Ukraine's ability to resist. For Putin, this was the beginning of a long and costly struggle he had not prepared for. Sanctions became one of the most powerful tools used against Russia. Countries froze assets, cut off key banks from international systems, restricted access to technology, and halted purchases of oil and gas. The intention wasn't just to punish Moscow economically, but to slow down its war machine. Russia suddenly found itself isolated from markets it depended on. Industries struggled to get parts. Companies closed down, and foreign investors fled. While Russia tried to fill the gaps with domestic production or new partnerships, the damage was already done, and it continues to weaken its economy year after year. One of the most remarkable parts of Ukraine's response has been its use of innovation, especially in drone warfare, cyber defense, and intelligence gathering. Ukraine transformed civilian drones into battlefield tools, and later developed sophisticated long-range drones capable of striking inside Russia. These strikes didn't just cause physical damage. They sent a psychological message that Russia's vast territory was no longer untouchable. Combined with Western intelligence and satellite support, Ukraine built one of the most advanced real-time battlefield awareness systems ever seen in modern conflict. Meanwhile, Russia's military shortcomings became more visible. Corruption within its ranks, outdated equipment, poor training, and weak logistics limited its ability to maintain momentum. Instead of decisive victories, Russia settled into grinding, costly battles. Tens of thousands of troops were lost, armored vehicles were destroyed in staggering numbers, and ammunition shortages plagued frontline units. Each setback made it clearer that Putin's initial assumptions about a quick victory were disastrously wrong. As the war continued, the world began to understand the deeper motivations behind Ukraine's resilience. This wasn't just a fight over territory. For Ukrainians, it was a fight to preserve their culture, their language, their democracy, and their right to choose their future. Putin's attempts to portray Ukraine as merely a Russian province only strengthened Ukrainian national identity. The more pressure Russia applied, the more unified Ukrainians became. It was an unintended consequence that Putin likely never anticipated. Another turning point came when Ukraine launched counteroffensives that reclaimed significant portions of territory previously occupied by Russian forces. These operations demonstrated Ukraine's growing capability to plan, coordinate, and execute complex military strategies. They also showed that Russian control of captured areas was far from secure. Each liberated town fueled optimism inside Ukraine and reinforced the belief that the country could eventually restore its territorial integrity. Internationally, the conflict reshaped alliances. NATO, which Russia hoped to weaken, became stronger and more united than it had been in decades. Countries that were previously neutral or hesitant moved toward cooperation and even membership. Meanwhile, Russia found itself increasingly reliant on a small number of partners who offered limited strategic benefits. The war didn't divide the West, it united it, and this unity continues to be one of Ukraine's most powerful advantages. On the economic front, Russia tried to adapt by redirecting trade and boosting domestic production, but the long-term costs are undeniable. Skilled workers left the country in large numbers, foreign businesses shut down operations, and inflation added pressure to everyday life. The war drained national resources and forced the government to divert massive funds toward the military. As the conflict dragged on, it became clearer that the economic strain was becoming a major vulnerability for Moscow. For Putin personally, the war has become a defining and deeply problematic legacy. Instead of securing his place in history as a strong leader, the invasion has revealed weaknesses within his regime. Political dissent increased, domestic criticism grew louder despite censorship, and the trust of elites began to erode. Even though the Kremlin maintains tight control, the underlying instability created by the war is a quiet but persistent threat. Leaders who appear invincible often face their greatest challenges from within. One of the biggest surprises in the conflict has been Ukraine's ability to strike back deep into Russia's infrastructure, especially its oil refineries, military bases, and logistics hubs. These attacks have multiple purposes. They disrupt Russia's supply chains, damage morale, and force Moscow to divert resources to defend regions it never expected to protect. The symbolism is powerful. The war is no longer confined to Ukrainian soil, and the consequences of aggression are returning to Russia itself. Against all expectations, Ukraine transformed from a country many thought would fall quickly into a nation capable of challenging a superpower. That transformation required immense sacrifice, but it also showcased the strength of democratic societies when pushed to defend themselves. It showed that determination, unity, and creativity can reshape the balance of power, even when facing a larger and better equipped opponent. And it showed that Putin's attempt to control Ukraine has instead strengthened Ukraine's place on the global stage. Russia, meanwhile, continues to face the consequences of a war it chose but could not control. Its military prestige is damaged, its economy is strained, its alliances are limited, and its domestic stability is uncertain. The price Russia is paying is not only measured in equipment, casualties, or sanctions. It is measured in long-term setbacks that will affect its global position for decades. A war intended to expand Russian influence has instead diminished it more than any external force could have done. Ukraine, despite ongoing challenges, has demonstrated a blueprint for modern resistance. Adaptable, innovative, decentralized, and deeply rooted in national identity. It has shown that modern warfare isn't just about numbers, but about strategy, technology, and the will to fight. As the conflict continues, Ukraine's resilience remains one of the most critical factors shaping the outcome. And each day that Ukraine stands strong is another day that undermines Putin's gamble. In many ways, the conflict has become a lesson for the world in the dangers of underestimating a smaller nation's resolve and the power of international unity. Ukraine's ability to turn the tables wasn't the result of one single moment, but a series of choices, sacrifices, and strategic advantages that accumulated over time. It was the result of leadership that communicated clearly, people who refused to give up, and allies who understood the stakes of the conflict. It was a demonstration that democracy, even when threatened by force, can endure. Looking forward, the long-term impact of this conflict will continue to shape geopolitics. Russia's position in the world has changed dramatically, and rebuilding its credibility will be difficult. Meanwhile, Ukraine's future, though uncertain, is filled with possibilities. Reconstruction, international partnerships, military modernization, and potential integration with European institutions will play key roles in shaping the next chapter. But one thing is clear: Ukraine has already earned a place among nations that refused to be conquered and rewrote the expectations of global power. The war also reshaped how countries view security, energy independence, and military investment. Nations across Europe accelerated defense spending, reduced dependence on Russian energy, and strengthened cooperation. These shifts weakened one of Russia's main sources of leverage. The long-term result is a Europe that is more resilient, more united, and more capable of resisting coercion. Ironically, the very war meant to divide Europe ended up bringing it closer together. For Putin, the consequences extend far beyond the battlefield. His image as a master strategist has been replaced with doubts about his judgment. His attempt to restore a sphere of influence around Russia has instead pushed neighboring countries closer to the West. And domestically, the pressure of sustaining a long war without clear victories has created cracks within the political and military establishment. These pressures may not cause immediate collapse, but they form a lasting instability that will define Russia's future. As the conflict continues, the world watches closely. But the key lesson remains: Ukraine turned the tables not through overwhelming force, but through resilience, intelligence, adaptability, and an unbreakable belief in its own future. Russia is paying the price for miscalculating the strength of a people determined to defend their homeland. And the story is far from over, but what has been written so far has already changed history. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being here as we explore one of the most important events of our time. If you found this explanation helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. There's much more to discuss, and as the situation evolves, we'll continue to break it down together. Stay informed, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.